The big issue, I think, in the globe, it's not an exaggeration, is COVID, and now its most recent permutation, Omicron. Give us a sense of Johnson & Johnson's position in that strategic battle.
Yeah, well, David, first of all, welcome here to Johnson & Johnson, and you're right. I mean, and first of all, I think it's important to just acknowledge the great progress that we've seen, and clearly we still have some big challenges in front of us, but if you think back to the uncertainty that all of us around the world, let alone here in the U.S., faced 20 months ago around would we have a vaccine, would we have therapeutics, what was going to be the path forward, we certainly have made a lot of progress. But I think what Omicron has demonstrated is that, look, we need to get everybody vaccinated. The sooner we can get everybody vaccinated, the sooner, and that, more and more we're learning includes a booster, the sooner that we're going to be able to prevent these additional mutations and hopefully get through it. And look, we remain absolutely committed to this. In fact, we're working real time as we speak, not only on our current version of the vaccine to get it out to as many people in the world as possible, but also on a next generation, depending on what we find out about Omicron. And we believe it's still going to take a collective effort of many companies, many countries, and frankly, the world taking this on.
So what do you know at this point, because it's early going, about the effectiveness of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine against the Omicron variant?
Well, we still have a lot to learn. And what I would say overall is that, we need to perform some additional testing. We know that this virus likely it transmits at a much faster rate, and that's not good. And number two, we're still trying to understand what it means in terms of the severity of the disease. We're encouraged by some of the other data that we've seen thus far regarding how the current vaccines, particularly when boosted, are reacting against this virus. But look, we've got to gather more data from testing in the clinic, from real-world evidence. We'll know a lot more in the coming weeks, but we're encouraged by what we've seen thus far.
Do you have any sense of the timeline when you might have some better read on how, for specifically the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, will work against Omicron?
We should know in the coming weeks and have a much better indication of exactly how ours works against this particular variant.
There's a lot of talk about maybe a next generation of vaccine specifically tailored for Omicron. Other vaccine makers are talking about that. It's a different technology Johnson & Johnson has. It's not the mRNA technology. Can you can you change your vaccine to address Omicron if necessary?
The short answer is yes, and we're working on that as we speak. But of course, where we want to start is to see how will the Omicron virus be impacted by the current vaccine. And look, again, we're encouraged by some of the data. We need to gather more to determine exactly, what the efficacy profile will look like. But right now, in fact, we're already working on a next generation should that be necessary.
One of the things that I've learned, I did not know before, is there's a different profile for the Johnson & Johnson vaccine as opposed to the others. And that is, it doesn't raise the antibodies of protection as much in the early stages, but it may last longer. What do you know about the duration of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine?
Well, from the very beginning, we tried to discover, design, and develop this vaccine to really have strong durability over a long period of time. And you're exactly right. Your body tends to have at least two responses. There's the antibody response, which think of that as like the first line of defense that your body musters to take on this kind of a virus. And then you have what's called T cell and B cell, which are the longer term. That's what really gives your body the memory so that it can respond many years later that you see with other vaccines. And some of the data that we've been able to pull together thus far does reflect that we have a very strong T cell and B cell response. And we're studying that right now to say exactly how does that manifest itself in terms of durability and patency over time. Because one thing we know for sure, that this virus isn't going to go away tomorrow. So it's not only important that you have a strong response immediately, but that 4, 6, 8, 12 months later, particularly in some of these other areas around the world, where the logistics of getting multiple doses is going to be really challenged.
Those of us in the United States sometimes focus on the United States, and of course this is a global pandemic. It's not the United States. Give us a sense of the Johnson & Johnson role in fighting the pandemic in the rest of the world. What is your position as opposed to the other vaccines in, for example, sub-Saharan Africa?
Well, as I said earlier, we knew from the very beginning that we were not going to truly have an impact with our vaccine on this pandemic unless we took a global approach. So whether we looked at the way that we tried to design it, the way that we tested it on a very global level, even the way that we're manufacturing. You know, right now we have about 10 different locations, not only here in the United States, but in South Africa and India and Europe. And in the overwhelming majority of our vaccines up to this point in time have really been used in the developing part of the world. So we are very committed to making that possible. I think certainly something that we've learned over the last few weeks with Omicron is that, you know, unless we can get people around the world vaccinated, unfortunately, this virus can continue to mutate, can continue to adapt itself, and present a danger for the rest of the world.
So you just made an interesting point I'm not sure I was aware of. If you take the total number of doses that have been administered thus far of Johnson & Johnson and compared the United States versus the rest of the world, what's the ratio?
Oh, it's significant. I don't have the exact ratio, but it's multiples more have been used in the developing part of the world versus the developed world.
What about mRNA? Is that something that you're interested in? Is it something, given our experience with this, you think maybe Johnson & Johnson should be taking a closer look at?
Well, I think mRNA is a very exciting technology, and in fact, we are working at it in a number of different areas. And again, I think that, you know, being in a position now, based upon the research that the industry has done, to have mRNA approaches, to have adenovirus approaches, to have multiple options, again, is just a reflection of how much the science has evolved, and it really better positions all of us to be better prepared for the future. And we think, again, having multiple approaches will be the best way to go.
Of course, your tenure is coming up at Johnson & Johnson, but before you leave, people have said at Johnson & Johnson there are several deals being considered, under active consideration. Might those involve mRNA? Do you need to make acquisitions to really move into that science?
Well, look, I can't share with you, of course, all the details of that, but one thing that I'm really proud of, particularly over the last 10 years, if you look at our track record of innovation at Johnson & Johnson, about 50% of the time we tend to source it externally because we know that we're never going to discover and develop everything within our own laboratories. And frankly, being a good partner, being able to work with scientists, whether it's at an academic center or a startup company, places around the world, is critical to success. You know, ultimately, we want to have the best solution, and we're agnostic whether it's developed in-house or, you know, externally. And I think is reflected in our track record. In fact, I think over the last 5 years, we've invested about $55 billion internally, and we've invested about that same amount externally to really try to source the best science that we can for patients around the world.
How has the pandemic changed the business of Johnson & Johnson as you look forward? Will vaccines be a much larger portion of your business?
Well, I think in several ways. One, we do think vaccines can be applied in so many areas. I mean, think about it for a moment. If we can take some of these technologies and apply vaccines to perhaps areas in cancer, perhaps in neuroscience and areas like Alzheimer's, so that we can actually prevent disease from happening in the first place, what a great achievement that will be. You know, all too often in these other diseases, we get to things too late in the course of the disease. So if we can engage and interact earlier to prevent that cascade from happening, we're going to be in a much better position. So yes, we're studying vaccines in a number of different areas. Two, I think the understanding and appreciation, whether it's mRNA, whether it's new cell-based therapies, or how can we actually think of it as changing the software in the cells, our understanding of that, the regulatory process, I think has been greatly accelerated during this pandemic period. And it's certainly my hope that we can use that to parlay into other areas. And last but not least, David, just the way that we've been able to partner with regulators, with governments, with other companies. You know, the more we can share knowledge like that, accelerate some of these development timelines, the better it's going to be for patients.
Alex, as you say, Johnson & Johnson has long been known for making substantial investments in science. Is that going to be even larger? Even today, you've announced some changes, some leadership changes coming up. Your long-term chief scientific officer is stepping down. You're going to replace him with not one, but two people.
That's right. Well, look, this year at Johnson & Johnson will invest, you know, just about $14 billion in research and development. That puts us among, I believe, the top 5 companies in the United States, the top 10 companies in the world. And we think that's essential for us to keep that rate and pace of innovation going. And you're right. Dr. Paul Stoffels, after, more than 25 years at Johnson & Johnson, an incredible career, not only in what he's done here, but for global public health, helping people around the world, decided to retire. But the good news is we've got a tremendous tremendous and deep bench of leaders to replace him, people like Dr. Bill Hite, Dr. Matai Maman, and those two leaders will be added to our executive committee, and I think even increase the voice of science among our senior leadership team.
An important part of your legacy will be the dividing the company, something a lot of people never thought they'd see. Did the pandemic really trigger that?
No, look, this has been part of an ongoing discussion that we've had with our board of directors. I mean, annually, we would talk about our portfolio, our diversified approach. And while we've always been proud of the heritage of our three different sectors and how we took it, we also realized that, you know, look, as dynamics change, as markets change, as science changes, as expectations change, that we need to evolve with it. We're excited about this announcement. We think it's going to unlock great potential in our consumer brands and for Johnson & Johnson, for our pharmaceutical business or medical device business going forward.
One last one, Alex, because this is toward the end of your tenure. What are you proudest of?
You know, David, I think what I'm most proud of is just to reflect on the number of patients and consumers. You know, we estimate that we touch more than 1 billion every day. And to know that we've been able to hopefully help people live longer, healthier, happier, and better lives, that's really important.